Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of the Full Quota podcast. This is your cricketing podcast, South African cricketing podcast that talks all things South African cricket. My name is Mpho and Tim, and I'm joined by my co-host Tim Delace, all the way in Cape Town. Tim, how are you doing?
All good, but all good. Yeah, everything's good.
Not raining that side?
No, but it looks like it might do later on. No, it's a bit chilly.
Yeah.
It's a bit chilly.
It's pretty interesting, obviously, with that playoff that was actually supposed to be in Pretoria. There was like clouds and rain around and lightning around last night, and I was just thinking about how if it wasn't Pretoria, we probably would have had a rain-affected game. But anyway, it wasn't Durban, and yeah, well done to the Dolphins for getting through that one. And we have a final in Paarl later on Sunday, so that's pretty cool. But that's not about today's show. But before we do anything, please do follow us at Full Quarter Pod on X. Subscribe to the Full Quarter Podcast on YouTube. As also, if you're looking for us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, just search Full Quarter Podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And then finally, you can buy some coffee. Just a lovely contribution to help us get ourselves going. We are planning on doing some podcasts later in the year at the World Test Championship out there in London. And, you know, this helps us do more content and more things like that in order for us to be able to get you closer to the game, the South African game as possible. Okay, Tim. You've been talking about some of the domestic changes and the stories that have been coming around and the changes to the domestic structure. And so you have a plan for us for today.
Yes. So obviously we spoke last week in very brief terms what we thought might happen with this restructuring. It's turned out for now there are no changes for next season, but I thought it was still important for us to get South African Cricket Association Andrew Breetzke on because I think changes are afoot, but we want to discuss with him because he will have all the details on what changes are likely to come, when, and just the general sense of where the players are in terms of the domestic game, because with every passing day, the game at the level that we speak about does seem to be getting marginalized ever more. But I don't want to be too pessimistic, but that's basically where we are. And that's basically why we got Andrew Breetzke on to give us the lowdown exactly where we are in terms of the domestic game, particularly below SA20.
Sure, let's bring Andrew Breetzke on and continue this conversation. Hi, Andrew, how are you doing?
Morning, guys. Morning, Mpho and Tim. It's good to be on the show again. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to give you all the answers. I'm a bit intimidated by that intro, but let's see.
Look, and Tim says he's negative. I'm a little bit more positive because I think for me, obviously, when I saw the initial news that came through around some of the changes and what they were proposing and all of that, I kind of was disappointed because I really enjoyed this period of a two-tier system. Obviously, financially, there are other implications, but I love the urgency of a promotion relegation. Like last week was, you know, if you watch Division 2 cricket, that was the culmination of everything, right? And then obviously now with Division 1, there's some big names there at the bottom sitting, waiting to go down. And that brings more eyeballs, that brings urgency. And I've always been a fan of that type of format in any sport. But obviously, it has its challenges, it has its benefits. How has this period been in terms of the new system outside of franchise cricket? And what things have you liked and what things haven't you liked?
Okay, how long have you got? So I think in answering that question, you need to take a step back because the challenges we face in South African cricket are not unique to South African cricket. They are worldwide challenges. Same challenges in Australia, same challenges in New Zealand, England, etc., etc. And they all stem from the dramatic and significant and vast changes that have happened to the cricket world landscape in the last 5 years. So cricket 5 years ago, as we know, is just not the same today. And that a key element of that, and we can unpack that for hours, but a key element of that is how money flows and how boards are generating revenue and how boards are struggling to be sustainable. So the landscape in the world is now extremely different to what it was 5 years ago. And that is a massive challenge for, in our context, for South Africa. So if you think of South African cricket in the last 3 years, financially, South African cricket has been sustainable for one reason alone, and that is because India toured us twice. Okay, that is the only home series one has that generates significant sums of money for you. At the same time, the bilateral cricket world is so disparate and I'd have to say broken at the moment. In other words, the international games we play, that for this next season, we don't have any home content. There's no Newlands Test match in January. There's no one coming over Christmas, etc. And whilst one goes, oh dear, that's sad. It's not sad, it's brutal. It's because you on bilateral cricket when actually someone tours your country. The next year, England and Australia come. But even then, the revenues we generate do not actually meet what we need to keep cricket going. So there's a constant debate all around the world in every country about the financial sustainability of the game. And if you think of the pyramid, which I've spoken about before, the pyramid, and you've got the Protea men sitting at the top of that pyramid, they generate 95% of everything that happens in going down. So all other cricket, for all intents and purposes, is development from a commercial economic point of view. Excuse me. So if you don't manage your finances really wisely, you've got a problem. And so what happened in England now in the last couple of months with the investment from the IPL teams into those counties and into the 100, that's effectively saved English cricket because there's an injection of so many hundreds of millions of pounds into their game. So the nature of the financial models in cricket are just in the last 5 years have been blown apart. In the next couple of weeks, actually, and hopefully you guys will feature on your show, World Cricketers Association. It's taken us a long time. We've put together a whole document after hundreds of interviews on the future of the game. And it deals with all these things in how you distribute money in the game so that countries become sustainable. So, and I'll get more in detail to your point, but if you look at, Afghanistan are a great white ball team. They could play Test cricket, but they don't because they can't afford to. Ireland are a Test nation. They don't play Test cricket. They can't afford to. That's at the lower end of the scale. You can't afford to. So if we play a Test series against Pakistan or West Indies, it's costing us a lot of money. So that's the financial challenge. So when you've got a structure that we have in South Africa, which is 23 teams, in total we've got 23 professional teams with the Proteas men, Proteas women at the top, excuse me, and the 6 women's Division 1 teams, 7 Division 2 teams, and the 8 teams at the bottom. That costs a hell of a lot of money to run. And that's the challenge facing South African cricket. And where do you get revenue in to actually sustain that? Because we need platforms, my latest favorite word, I've just used it here at the SA Schools tournament. You need platforms on which players can play to be seen to move forward. And if you're doing away with cricket, you're doing away with platforms. So the SA20 is a very good example. It's a platform. If you do well on the SA20 platform, my word, the sky's the limit. So Corbin Bosch, someone pulls out of the IPL this week, and Corbin Bosch has been taken up into the IPL. How did he get that right? He was playing on an SA20 platform where he was playing at the highest level and he was performing, and he got noticed. If the SA20 wasn't there, Corbin Bosch would have not gone into that tournament. So we need platforms. Obviously, the Proteas is a platform for leagues, and we need our domestic game to be a platform for players to move up in the pipeline for the Proteas. South African cricket's future is dependent on there being a strong Proteas men team. To have a strong Proteas men team, you have to have a strong pipeline moving through from domestic cricket and a strong transformation pipeline. So you want to have platforms where players are playing at the highest level and getting through. Getting to your point on promotion relegation, one of the challenges we've seen with promotion relegation is the nature of our game, as I've just said, is that you have to have a pipeline to the Proteas. So you want your provinces to be developing players so that they are able to move up and step up into the Proteas space and perform. Okay. The difficulty we face now in the new world of cricket in the last 5 years is you no longer have 15 or 16 players playing for the Proteas men. You have about 40 players. And why is that? Because one, there's so much cricket being played across the leagues. Your top players are not going to play every game you have for the Proteas. So players sit down at the beginning of the year with CSA in a very constructive meeting to say, so what do we want you to play? You know, you're a bowler. You can't play every single international game and every T20 and so you're going to bring in new players. You need to blood new players in. In turn, if you're going to have about 30, 40 players playing for the Proteas, they get pulled up from the provinces, which means some of the provinces might lose 3 or 4 players. So they don't have their strongest team. So the flip side of that is, well, should I actually contract the best up-and-coming player if I know he's going to be pulled up to the Proteas? Because if I don't have him, then I might be weakened, and then I'm closer to relegation. So it's become a very complex market. So I'd much prefer to contract a player who I know is good, but not going to play for the Proteas, because I'm going to have him the whole season. He's not going to get called up for a Protea game. Or for argument's sake, an SAA game, because we're having more SAA games. So as soon as you have more SAA games, you impact the ability of the provinces to retain their best players, because the SAA is effectively the next best players who then play up. And if it clashes with domestic cricket, well, then you don't have your best team. So it's a complex situation we find ourselves in just on promotion relegation. The angst of promotion relegation is good. It creates context, and we need context in our cricket. And that's the flip side argument. And you said that, and I agree with that. But I've said a lot here as a sort of intro. The world of cricket is complex. The finances are complex. Cricket in South Africa, as it's currently run, is not sustainable. And that is not just about the number of teams or the structure of the game. That's across the board of the game.
And you said this a year ago. We last spoke just about a year ago. You said exactly the same thing. Gave us exactly the same warnings. I'm like Mpho. I love the domestic structure. I love the fact that the 2 divisions. I love the fact that there's promotion relegation. Where do you think it's going to end up eventually? We've already had the decision that next year is going to be its current setup, but where do you think it's likely to end up 2, 3, 4 years down the line once they've come to some sort of decision? Because, as you rightly point out, in its current form, it's just not sustainable.
Now, that's a difficult question to answer, because first of all, let me just say there was never going to be a change next season. So sometimes the press, to get a headline and come out with an article that was misplaced and mischievous, because it was like, yeah, but nothing's going to change. If you change a cricket system, it's like turning the Titanic around. It takes time. You've got to change the model. You've got to change the contracting. You've got to change the time frames, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much, and as a players' union, there are a lot of protections we want in that type of process to protect our players. I mean, Tim, the truth of the matter is I can't answer that, because I don't know, because that's an ongoing process in terms of what should an ideal structure look like. The key issue for me is, if there's a kid playing cricket in the hills of the Kai out in the Eastern Cape, and he's got talent, what is his path to play for the Proteas? How does he move through the system to play for the Proteas? We've got to answer that question. What we can't afford to have is that kid in the Transkei, who's a good cricketer, just never been able to or fulfill any type of promise, to get a platform, to use my word, to actually move forward in the game. So you have to design a structure that caters for your best players playing highly competitive cricket, because only when you play highly competitive cricket can you move up to the Proteas easily. So whether that's Titans versus Western Province, and at the same time helping that kid in the Kai. So there's got to be cricket in Border, and Border, sadly, are a province that is in a really bad state. So, but we've got to have cricket in Border, especially if you want to get Black African talent coming through, because that's where a lot of it is. And you've got to have a strong Western Province who similarly have massive challenges. So whether that means we've got 15 professional teams across the board, or we have a smaller number of professional teams, but we have cricket in those provinces that is managed in a different way. We have to look at how players are loaned between provinces. We can't have good players sitting out and not playing cricket. We need them to be playing cricket. So I can't answer the question on what will that structure look like. Will the structure be exactly as it is now? I don't think so, because then we'll be bankrupt. So there are two ways you change the structure. One is you sit down strategically and you make a decision as to what can we afford moving forward. The alternative is you wait for the economics to actually just hit you hard. Sadly, we're already seeing that. We're already seeing that. We have cricket sustainability issues at domestic level at the moment. So, for example, we have teams who don't have nets pre-season. So the guys aren't playing on turf nets before the season starts. That's just not professional. We have teams who don't have enough balls to practice with. That's not professional. We have teams sitting in a bus for 15 hours between game A and game B to save money on another type of transport cost, and then they get out and play the next game. That's not professional. So we're cutting costs everywhere to survive, and then all you're doing is you're diminishing your product in that sense. So I'm sorry, I can't answer that directly what it will look like. I don't think it will look like we currently are, because I just don't think we can afford what we currently are. But having said that, you can't just look at the structure of the game and say you must change it to be cost effective. You've got to look at other areas of where your revenue is coming from, what you can structure better within Cricket South Africa, how you structure your development programs better from a financial point of view. That's the challenge. And how you, as Cricket South Africa, become more attractive for sponsors, which is happening. Cricket South Africa have attracted a number of new sponsors, which we'll hear about in the next few months. And that's primarily on the back of the Proteas men actually starting to do really well across formats. So sorry, I can't answer that directly. That's an ongoing process which is being consulted upon. And before, again, where the newspaper article is mischievous is that there's such a significant process one has to go through. It's got to go to board, it's got to go to members council, there's got to be a formal consultation process with SACA if it affects players' jobs, etc., etc. So our position of SACA is we want to protect players' jobs, obviously, but we also want a sustainable cricket system, and we've got to marry those two very carefully.
Paul, I'm just going to come in quickly.
Do that, yeah.
I'm glad you raised that point about Border and those regions, because there'll be lots of people that won't realise that Mpho already have a trophy in the cabinet from last season, and that's important not only for them, but it's important for that area. And Mpumalanga yesterday last weekend were
Just
2 balls
amazing.
away from a final appearance. That's important, and that, as you said, we need to have players from those regions coming through, and for them to be successful is a good thing for Cricket South Africa.
Yeah. But if you look at what's happening in rugby, and rugby's got its own financial challenges. Significant. No sport in South Africa doesn't have financial challenges. They've got the Springboks sitting at the top there, and then they've actually got these 4 franchise teams that actually are the core of where the Springboks come from. If you think about it, they are. Every Springbok is actually playing for either the Stormers, the Sharks, etc., etc. And then they've got a level below that, call it the Currie Cup level, where effectively, if you're playing there, you desperately want to get into that setup at the URC, because that's where you get to. And then under that, you've got other types of cricket, for example, the Varsity Cup. So a Varsity Cup player wants to get into that next level. So they've almost got a much more set hierarchy than we've got. We've created a new hierarchy in the last 3 years, in that you've got the Proteas and then you've got the SA20. I think most players will agree that for you to get noticed on a white ball platform, you need to be playing in the SA20. And that's been proven over the last couple of years, where the players who move up into the Proteas are really players who are performing at SA20 level. So you've got to look at your platforms and your layers as to how you move up etc., etc. And what we do have in South African cricket, which is a massive advantage over every other country in the world, which I don't necessarily think we take advantage of as much as we should, is we've got a phenomenally strong school system. And I'm actually up here for the SA20 Schools competition, and it's just another great platform for players at that level. But we do produce great school players, and how those school players move up through the system, that's the challenge. That is the challenge. I don't think we've got that right yet. We lose players, and players are not playing, and they become disillusioned. So we've got a lot of the good raw material. We've just got to get a structure that can channel it through to be good. And yeah, we need to be able to find players in Border and in Mpumalanga, etc., wherever they might be. And the system's got to allow for that. But the system's got to survive financially. That's the challenge.
Yeah, and obviously on the one side you've been talking about from a financial perspective has been the costs, right? It's very costly in terms of doing that. And obviously you've spoken obviously about, there's not enough revenue that's being generated. The question for me for domestic cricket is there no way to make domestic cricket financially viable by trying to get sponsors, trying to spend a little bit of money to try and get it to a point? And we're in a sweet spot right now where both Proteas men and women are winning, and you could consider them the fourth best team in the world. New Zealand people will argue whatever it is, but surely this is the moment where some of the national sponsors also look down at the domestic game. Obviously the broadcasting is an issue as well, but is there no way to get domestic cricket start generating some revenue, even if it's 50 million a year? It's still something.
Yeah. So when the new structure was created, whenever that was, 4 years ago, one of the fundamental premises of that new structure was because every province had its own team now, professional team, it would enable them to commercialize that team. That unfortunately hasn't happened. Of the 15 provinces, 3 have succeeded in that, and that's the Dolphins, the Titans, and the Lions. As for the rest, they have not succeeded. In fact, some of them are in phenomenal, serious financial difficulty, and that's been well publicized. And that's what impacts our cricket sustainability element. So that hasn't happened. I think, Mpho, it's an excellent question, but it's an excellent question because it's when I say the world of cricket is different, 100% different to what it was 5 years ago and 5 years before, part of the answer is there. So what has happened post-COVID is sponsorship revenues, commercial investments have just fallen off the cliff. They're not there. The Springboks are picking up well now, but my word, the Springboks have never been as unbelievably powerful as they are now. They're the greatest sporting brand we've ever had. Yet I make the phrase, they're picking up now. They should have picked up a long time ago, but only now. The Proteas are picking up well, based on the fact that I think you're right. I think we're in the top 3-4 in the world. We've made semis and finals of white ball cricket and in the final of the Test Championship. And despite a lot of criticism of South African cricket, you have to say, well, credit to the players and to CSA, we've got the team there. The other thing that's happened is there's so much sport around. That's the second thing. Third thing, that people can watch a number of other things. And you've got the SA20 that have come in the mix too, and they've got a really successful model, which one can chat about. But unless the sport is being broadcast to a wide audience, a sponsor won't go near it. So if you think what would be good for domestic cricket to get eyes on the game, where a sponsor would go, oh, I want to sponsor this because it's broadcast. So a sponsor's only going to sponsor a competition or team if it's broadcast. There's no benevolent, oh, I like cricket, I'm going to give them 20 million. I'll give them 20 million. I need to know it's getting broadcast somewhere. Supersport has its own challenges at the moment, but it's also a small base. You actually need it on SABC.
Yes, 100%.
SABC takes you into a much larger audience in South Africa. SABC are just not in a good space to do that because they have their own challenges. So every time I go down this rabbit hole, there are challenges in the commercial market. Supersport's got challenges. SABC has got colossal challenges. So sadly, your question's brilliant, but sadly, the factors we need to be in place for us to make domestic cricket commercially on the point are not there. The other challenge is when I say the cricket world's changed, we've got so much cricket being played when the Proteas are playing, and then there's domestic cricket being played at the same time. Why am I going to sponsor domestic cricket if the Proteas are playing at the same time? So it's a massive discussion we have in cricket, is how do we make it more commercially viable? I believe that the solution is for Cricket South Africa, and we have this debate and argument a bit, is to say you need to put windows out there where people know that that is the competition that's going to be played then. So maybe you start your season with 4 4-day games in September because players like that, because it's from a conditioning point of view. But let's make October T20 month. So why is the SA20 so successful? Because we all know in January there's T20 cricket, it's SA20, it's summertime, blah, blah, blah. It's all good. Yet the last 2 seasons we've moved the T20 competition for cricket. So people say last year this time we were starting, if you recall, we were starting the T20 competition at the same time the IPL was on. And people say, "Oh, we're playing T20 cricket." So I thought we played that in October. No, we're playing it now. Then that's the last thing a sponsor wants to hear. A sponsor wants to know that in October every year, leading into summer, which suits my product, I can get involved in that. And SuperSport must broadcast it. So I think there are a few small things we can do, but it's a very difficult market below the Proteas. Yeah. Even for the Proteas women, it's a difficult market. And they've been unbelievably successful, but we don't have sponsors lining up with commercial interest in them. The sponsorship markets are low at the moment. And we're relying a lot on betting companies. If you think about who the teams have got as sponsors. Yeah.
No, and the other thing is obviously then if it can't, then you try and make the national teams more viable. But obviously that's the struggle that you have, and my frustration is that I do feel, and I have actually posed this to people at CSA before in a formal meeting, is to try and split out the rights to give different parties something that they can broadcast, like the SABC. If you give them a package that they can manage, that gives you an opportunity to get some sort of advertising revenue going, even if it's a sharing mechanism between the two. Because my frustration around the SABC in itself is that sport is the way that they can actually get themselves out of the challenges that they have, largely because of the concentrated nature of people watching a soccer match, a rugby match, a cricket match, and the amount of ads that you can put on the screen or whatever, and sponsorship opportunities you can put at the ground. But they are, and obviously they have, as you mentioned, they have their issues, and it's really frustrating from that perspective, because I look at something like the PSL, the Premier Soccer League, and look at how they are able to generate as much revenue as they can on SuperSport and on SABC. With the amount of sponsorship opportunities. But yeah, and the SABC even has an app, which is the wildest thing in the world.
To be fair to Cricket South Africa, I know how hard they've tried to get SABC on board. And sometimes very frustratingly in their engagements with SABC, but thinking they've got some type of arrangement, which is just a foot in the door to get that market. Because, you're almost willing for it to be a loss leader if you're going to get a 20 million rand sponsor who wants to get into the whole of Soweto to watch cricket type of thing. So they've tried. I know they have tried. Hopefully the SABC can actually recover a bit and become more viable as a national broadcaster of our sport, because it goes for rugby as well. It goes for the football. It goes. You want the entire country to be watching your national teams, because that's what generates interest. SuperSport has a small footprint, really, in that, and we need every South African. Yeah, it's not a lot of people, and you want your cricket to be broadcast into the black communities where there are diamonds there who you want to introduce them to the game. They've heard about it. You want them to see it. You want them to fall in love with it. Whereas at the moment, if you've got SuperSport, you've got that privilege, but you don't on SABC. Massive challenge for our country, that. Having said that, when someone stands up and says, yeah, but it must be free to air for everybody, well, that would just bankrupt the sport. So you're in that catch-22. Cricket South Africa, when India toured last December, when India toured in November last year for 4 T20s, that's worth 500 million rand. It's unbelievable. It's $9 million per T20. It's what keeps us going. It's the lifeblood of the game. So that's the reality of broadcast revenues. They are the biggest source of revenue for cricket boards around the world, and you've got to be careful how you touch them.
Yeah. But you do make a good point there. There is a possibility of a streamlining. We've already got SA20 Schools on 216. If the T20 Challenge is on a different channel somewhere, and then the SA20 is all three competitions are being broadcast on television somewhere accessible. That's at least something, a potential opening there.
It is, and when is sport on TV good? It's when it's got context. You're always looking for context. So I think one of the most positive things that happened at the SA20 this year. I went to the opening game in Gqeberha, and it was MI Cape Town versus the Sunrisers. And if you recall, Dewald Brevis had a phenomenal good innings that night. He hit the ball out the park, and I remember sitting there, and he hit some phenomenal sixes, and there wasn't a noise in that stadium. No one cheered. It was absolute silence. And when the Sunrisers took a wicket, the whole place erupted as if there was no tomorrow. And I remember saying to someone, this is actually good because it shows that it's starting to mean something. There's context in the game. People actually just want the Sunrisers to win. So the SA20 after the year 3 has started generating context by virtue of I'm a MI Cape Town supporter and, bugger the rest type of thing. And why has SA Schools and Supersport Schools done well is because there's an inbuilt context. If Sax play Rondebosch, it's a context of 100 years. So it brings eyeballs to the game. And that gives meaning to it. So you need meaning in cricket. And in the domestic game, we need the meaning as well. We need it to be competitive. We need people to believe this is my team. And that generates eyeballs on the game when it means something for me for this team to win or lose. So there are opportunities, there are platforms, as I keep saying, and we've got to make sure that they get exploited well in terms of sponsorship and that they're getting out to the people. That's the most important thing now.
Something that's very dear to both our hearts is Division 2. We try to talk as much about of Division 2 as possible and as many players as possible. Is there anything that's being done that you know of that is promoting that? We're talking about promotion here. Promoting that game just a little bit more, i.e. having their 4-day final or 1-day final on television. Just that final. So at least then there's some sort of context. Oh, and then when that player eventually goes into Division 1, the fan base know about him. Is the moment Division 1 and Division 2 getting wider and wider and wider?
I think one of the challenges is it's getting wider. And how you measure that is not necessarily on how you've said about it. It's effectively is your top junior players don't go into Division 2 and then Division 1. They go straight to Division 1. So they skip around Division 2. Division 2, the guys have got to prove themselves to move up. And there are really good players there. I think of John at SVD who's moved up, who brilliant players who have to use that platform to get noticed and to move up. About 2 seasons ago, I think, or 3 seasons ago, we had some Division 2 cricket televised. We haven't had it this year. I think, Tim, the answer to that is that there's possibly space for you've got the SA20, which is the premier T20 event in South Africa. You've got the domestic T20. Maybe the answer is that the best Division 2 team in its T20 competition actually plays with the big boys in that T20 competition. So there's some cross-pollination. I think that can possibly work to give the profile. But the challenge is it's a logistics challenge for example, Supersport. Is they've got to have a truck, they've got to have cameras, and now you're telling them you want to televise a game in Oudtshoorn. It's just, from a cost point of view, just absolutely not viable. So those are the challenges we face around getting that type of exposure. But if we could get some cross-pollination, then I think you could start looking. So you could watch SVD play at Supersport Park, for example. That might be the answer to that type of thing. But at the moment, I think it is a challenge. It is a challenge for B division teams. I think they very much rely and have to work their local economy to back the team. In other words, this is our team here in this town, back it type of thing, which is great. And a lot of them do it really well because that's what will make them sustainable.
I mean, my last question around this, Andrew, is the timetable. We've had a lot of players asking us when we asked them what they'd like to change and what they would like to change about the system, is that they'd like more games, right? More 4-day series games. Obviously, everyone plays 7 now, and they're wanting 10. Even the one-day cup, they've mentioned that they'd like more games there. Obviously, the move is possibly most likely the more lucrative way is more games in T20, similar to what you're saying, maybe have a Division 2 versus Division 1, like that first season. Or the other idea is double headers, where, for instance, SWD drives up to Newlands and you have a double header versus Division 2, Division 1 playing on the same day. But that's just an idea to throw out.
Yeah, look, you're beating our drum there on more games. We're not playing enough cricket. Not at all, and the women aren't playing enough cricket. So now you sit with the actual predicament. So more cricket, which costs more money, with the number of teams you've got. So you're almost doing this. How do you balance out what is more cricket with the number of teams you've got? So I think you're 100% correct. I think we've seen in the last couple of years, excuse me, our top players, a lot of them, especially batters, are coming through quite late in their 20s. To becoming top international players. I'm a firm believer that's how long it takes you to actually understand your game and mature. But there's another school of thought that says, yeah, but that's also happening because guys aren't playing as much cricket as players did 15 years ago. You know, by age 23, a player might have played 40 first-class games. So he knew his game better. So he was ready to move forward. For that guy to get 30 or 40 first-class games now, he's got to be 28. So it's clearly an issue. We're not playing enough cricket. We know it's the constant of the players saying we need to play more. There's too much downtime where players aren't playing, which isn't great either from a conditioning point of view and a consistency point of view. So a big point that we're putting across is we've got to play more cricket. And as part of these discussions on what should the future structure be, one of the core elements is how do we play more cricket? And who do we play against? And do we start doing things like saying, you know what, 4 of your county teams, when you're not playing, come out to South Africa for pre-season and play some of our provincial teams. We have to, the countries and the provinces that are going to survive in the new world of cricket are the ones that think out the box. So when people say to me the SA20 is not good for South African cricket, it's independent, it's taken up a month, I said, you know what? We could have carried on doing what we did the old way and just died a slow death. You've got to actually be in front of the world and be different about how you do things. So I would like to see Notts or Durham playing cricket in South Africa at a certain time of the year so that we've got more content for our local players, which would be great against the international team. We already have a lot of those teams coming for their pre-season. Tim, in Cape Town, you would have seen a lot of those counties come out. We've got to think out the box. I grew up on provincial cricket, the provinces and the Proteas. I loved it. I went to watch it. It was my life. But I have to accept it's absolutely new world now. That's archaic. That's gone. You've got to think out the box. You've got to be different. Who would have ever thought that IPL teams would own basically 50% of some of the county teams in the 100? The English allowing that to happen? Never. It's happened. It's happened. The globalization of world cricket by those Indian teams is now complete. And the last one. And that's your world reality. So you can carry on thinking you must do things like you did and you'll die a slow death, or you start becoming very creative and doing things differently by creating different types of tournament, different types of competitions to not only generate revenue, but to give your players playing opportunity.
Yes.
Indeed. We haven't really touched on the women's game. So they've got this title sponsor for the T20 and 50 over competition. How has
Yeah.
that changed for them? Because it just on the fact that they've got the sponsor, I'm seeing more content without trying. I am seeing more content of these games, and I'm not even trying. I just go on to X and it's there. How
Yeah.
has that changed things, and is it in the right direction?
Look, the women's game's going in the right direction. They've got their 6 professional teams. I think probably the most exciting thing that's happened this year is if you watch that the SA Under-19 team playing at the World Cup,
Oh,
and
yes.
you looked at the talent across that team. I was looking at those young ladies and saying, my word, these young ladies can play cricket. These aren't hockey players who now play cricket. These are serious cricketers who play with a straight bat. They Laura Wolfart style type. So that looks very promising, because if you want your cricket system to thrive and survive, you need grassroots to move up. So that's evidence that at the school level, I don't think it's a big enough pool yet at school level, but that there's some good cricket being taught and coached, and we saw it in that SA Under-19 team, and those girls I'm sure will move up into the professional ranks. I think the 6 teams system has to still mature, and by that I mean provinces need to understand how they're contracting, where they're contracting. Their challenges there, for example, a large percentage of the contracted players are between the ages of 17 and 21. So they are young. You don't actually see that in the men to the degree that you do in the women. So it's good in the sense that those women are getting exposure to professional cricket. So there are a lot of pluses that we're seeing. I think a lot of people thought when Mignon retired and Lizelle Lee and Danae and Shavnim, world-class players, wow, that's going to be terrible for us. But actually, it's great to have seen new talent come through. The fact that Hollywood Bets have come in as a sponsor, credit to them, because they're sponsoring something that is new, unknown. They're almost taking a punt on it. And the fact that you are seeing more of it means it shows how sponsorship works. There's some profile around it. You start to see who the players are. So the women's game is in a healthy space. I think it still has to mature. If you think our men's game is decades old, if you think of the context of how you play cricket. So for the women to get there, it's going to take a while. They don't play enough cricket. Remember, they only play white ball cricket. So that means in a season, you're not playing a lot of cricket. That's a challenge. And I think there has to be a debate on the model of contracting. Overseas, I think they're a bit more wise in how they contract. More semi-professional type contracts where the player actually does have a career, as, for example, one of our players a teacher, but still plays professional cricket, as compared to be full-time cricket. So it's in a good space. It has to mature, but we're suddenly starting to produce some really good female cricketers, which 5 years ago we were worried about. So it just shows the system does work.
And the great thing about that under-19 side is that there were some girls who were playing in Division 2, which is unheard of in South African cricket, the ability to elevate somebody from down there, well, not down there, from that level.
Yeah, and even yesterday evening, I did a presentation to the schools teams here in Pretoria, and in the girls' schools teams, there were about 2 or 3 provincial players there already, which is great for those schoolgirls to be suddenly playing with schoolmates who actually play in provincial cricket. So there's some healthy things happening in the women's game.
Excellent. And then finally for me is, give us an idea of this partnership that you have with SA20 around scholarships. Give us the details of how it's going to work and the like.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim, for that one. So we've worked very closely with the SA20 from inception of the whole idea of the SA20. Graham Smith sat down with me and said, this is what we want to do. And we've always had a very open and constructive relationship around contracting, around regulations. We do a lot of work with them. Then they sat down and said, look, we want to create this SA20 schools competition, a platform for school kids to be seen. And we want SACA to get involved. Specifically, we're doing a lot of the education stuff around integrity. So my sessions last night were around anti-corruption, anti-doping, being a professional, et cetera, for all the teams here at the finals. And the other thing we sat down and said, well, let's start a scholarship scheme. So the winning school in the boys and in the men's division effectively gets a scholarship for a kid to go in grade 8 at that school. And then the SA20 and SACA will pay 50% of the school fees each for that kid to go through school. It's obviously a good cricket school because they've won the tournament. So it's a young cricket player. And we've put together a protocol how we'll do that. So Ruan Schliebers, who's our head player development manager, who does a lot of work with top school athletes, not just cricketers, be it hockey players, rugby players, where he mentors them at school level. He will be a mentor, a specific development manager for the recipients of the bursaries. And that's not about your cricket career. That's about you as a person, your academics, social integration, cricket, etc., etc. So there'll be a support network to help the player go through school in the most supported way as well. So that's a big part of the program. I think it's important that it isn't seen as, oh, we give a scholarship to a kid going to school. That doesn't work. We know that doesn't work. A scholarship for a kid going into a high-end school that's high-performing in sport, which these schools means they need to have a comprehensive network of supports. So we as SACA are going to be providing that, and there'll be, like I say, a boy and a girl into the winning team. And yeah, it's just a contribution from us and the SA20 to actually the development of young cricketers in the country. That cricketer, that grade 7, will be selected through a process. Through a panel, who will sit down and say, who is the deserving recipient. So yeah, we've got quite a comprehensive process run. I'm proud of it. It's a way of getting involved at grassroots. It's a way of just adding another dimension to this SA20 Schools competition. And hopefully it will go from strength to strength. And hopefully we'll have 1 or 2 protests coming out of that in the future. I'd be really proud of that if we can do that.
That's amazing, Andrew. Some would say the rich keep getting richer because you're adding a talented child to a already winning team. But as a former scholarship child myself, very, very important, and it's really needed. So that's actually a good way to end, I think, our show today, Andrew. Thank you very much for joining us today, and you've given us a lot of insight into where the future holds for SA cricket and what the challenges are, because I think a lot of people don't know these challenges, and it also speaks to how India keep on getting preferential treatment in ICC tournaments going forward. But yeah, we're gonna probably have a window for India at 4 p.m. in 2027. It seems.
Yeah. No, thank you. Great being on the show.
Sure.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thanks.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Bye. Tim, really great show. I like these ones. I think they're really, really amazing just to get insight into the non-on-field aspects of the game. And yeah, it's still tricky waters, murky waters, but I do think we have a way out. And I think, yeah, there'll be changes, but I think the changes are going to be for the good of the game.
Yeah, I'm more positive than I was at the start of the conversation. It's not quite as doom and gloom as he says the paper was suggesting. Don't always believe what you read sometimes. But no, it's always good to get them on and give us a real flavour of where the game is in terms of the players' perspective. Because although we have those interviews with players, he's at the coalface at the entire structure. So that's it's very important. Very important conversation. Yeah, certainly learned a lot.
Yeah, so we'll be back on Monday talking the finals of the one-day cups. There's one tomorrow with the Inyati taking on the Tuskers in Pietermaritzburg, and you've also got Boland taking on the Dolphins, who did a smash and grab last night in Boland in Paarl. So that's going to be us talking through and obviously preparing you guys for the resumption of the 4-day series, and talking about how it could be possible that Tim could be covering a team in Division 2, and that's Western Province. But outside of that, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. And if you're watching on YouTube, please do like and subscribe. Follow us on 4Quarter Pod on X, and also 4Quarter Podcast on Apple Podcast and Spotify. From ourselves, Mpho and Tim, it's goodbye and lesale kakagiso.